Hey everyone, and welcome to Real World Coding, where everything works on the first try. Wouldn't that be nice? Today we're going to be jumping back into factory functions and seeing how we can turn them into constructor functions using the new keyword. And we'll also be looking at a second usage of the keyword this. So stay tuned. All right, so let's take a look back at our code example from last time. We have a function makePerson, and what it will do is it will create a new person using the object.create pattern. It'll give it a name, and then it'll return that newly created object out. And this is good and fine and well, but there are some patterns in JavaScript that will automate some of these processes for us. So we're gonna do that. A couple things we're gonna do right up front. We're gonna no longer manually create this new object, and we're no longer going to manually return it out. Now, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating something called a constructor function. And this is going to be a special type of function which is going to make use of the new keyword in JavaScript. And what a constructor function will do is basically it'll have three steps. So it will automatically create a new object for us. It will link this object up to the parent object, which was previously person, but now is going to be something called the prototype. So we have previously seen the sort of more casual usage of the word prototype to describe any object's parent object, but there is actually a property called prototype in JavaScript, and we're going to see that in just a minute. So those are two of the three things. The third thing that the constructor function is going to do is it's going to return that newly created object back out. Whenever we are creating a constructor function, we want to signify that okay, this function is a specific type of function intended to be used with the new keyword. And in order to let other developers who are reading our code know that, okay, this is a constructor function, it's intended to be used in this particular way, we are going to capitalize our function. Let's just use this one instance just for now. I want to actually write those three steps down. First step, it will create a new object. Second step, it will link the object up to a property called prototype. And third thing, it will return the new object back out of the function. So now that we are no longer manually creating an object called new person, we no longer have this name new person at our disposal. So if we want to attach this name property in the same way that we did previously, what we're going to do is we are going to actually attach it to something called this. Now this is going to be a second usage of the keyword this, very different usage than what we've seen previously in this series. And we'll kind of see how this all plays out in just a minute. I'm going to illustrate this whole process. And since we no longer need to explicitly return it out, we can get rid of this as well. Okay. It's at this point that I kind of need to take a quick detour out and explain a very important concept in JavaScript. All functions in JavaScript are both functions and objects. So the way that I kind of like to think about it is anytime you have a function, what this function is both the functionality of the function as we would think of it, and it is also an object. So you can kind of think of it as like a function-object combo. And so inside of every object portion of the function-object combo is a property called prototype. And this property is also an object. And on that object, there is a property called constructor. And what that property is, it contains the functionality of that function. So whenever you have a function in JavaScript, it's both a function and an object, and on that object is a prototype, and on that object is a constructor, which is that function. And in order to prove that to you, I am going to take my code snippet and bring it into my Chrome DevTools. And now there's one very important thing to note here. Constructor functions have to be created using the function keyword. And this is because constructor functions are a bit of an older syntax in JavaScript. They have more recently been replaced with something called a class, which we're going to get into later in the series. But for now, anytime we want to make a constructor function, it has to be using the function keyword. So let's take a look at this. And I want to actually look at this function, but I don't only want to look at the function itself. I also want to look at the object portion of the function object combo. Now, how can I do that? Well, what I can do is I can say console.dir, which is short for directory, and that will allow me to see the object portion of the makePerson function. So I'm going to open up this little triangle here, and I can see it has a whole bunch of properties. It has something on it called prototype, which inside of it is an object, and inside of that object is a property called constructor, which inside of that constructor is a function called makePerson. Okay, so that's how you can see object portions of function object combos. All right, so going back to our code example from before, what happens when we actually invoke this function using the new keyword? Well, let's imagine that when we invoke this function, we're kind of opening up a new function level execution context for that function. And remember that I said 3 things happen when we use the new keyword to invoke a constructor function. It's going to create a new object, it's going to link the object up to prototype, and it's going to return the new object back out. So we're going to do those 3 things. We are going to create a new object. That's the very first thing it will do. Second thing is it will link the object up to prototype. But how? It's going to link it up via that dunder proto property that we explained in the past few videos. And then the third thing it will do is it will return that object back out to the context where it was actually invoked, which in this case, it's being assigned to the constant Walter. Now, very, very important here, the second usage of the keyword this in JavaScript. When we use the keyword this inside of a constructor function, so when we're actually invoking that function and it's doing whatever it does inside of the function definition, what this will refer to is the object that is created automatically by that constructor function. In our diagram here, that was this object here that was automatically created. So in this case, in that piece of code, we are creating a property name, and that will take in whatever the name was that that function accepted. I believe in this case it was Walter. So the second usage of the keyword this in JavaScript, it refers to this object here that is automatically created under the hood by the constructor function and then later automatically returned out, okay? So after this function invocation has run, Walter will be an object with a property on it called _proto, which will link up to this prototype object. So at that point, the question is, if you remember back to the previous video, we had used our factory function to manually create an object with a sort of parent-child relationship where the parent was this object person and the child was the object that we were creating inside of the function. So how can we once again get all of this functionality from this person object onto that parent object in the parent-child relationship? Well, in this scenario, the child in this case is the object that is being returned out of the constructor function and assigned to the constant Walter. So that's our child. Now, what is the parent? Like I said in my diagram, the parent is that prototype object. So how can we get all of that functionality onto the prototype object, that parent object? Well, we can take all of this and we can access makePerson's prototype by simply saying makePerson prototype. And we're going to add these properties directly onto the prototype right here. So I'm going to say arms 2, legs 2, and we will have a method called greet, which will be a function which will console log, hi, my name is this name. Same as before. So now what we can do is we can take this whole code snippet once again. I'm going to bring it into the Chrome DevTools. And once again, we need to change this to a function using the function keyword. And now what I can do is I can see that whole parent-child relationship. So I want to first look at my makePerson and make sure that these properties that I placed on the prototype actually ended up on it. So let's take a look at its prototype, and I see on it arms, legs, and greet. Okay, so far so good. Now I want to take a look also at Walter and make sure that the parent-child relationship via the dunder proto property is present. So let's take a look at Walter. And this is an object created using the makePerson constructor function. So we see that here, and we see via the dunder proto, it links up to the parent, that prototype object where arms, legs, and greet are. So that now, if we wanted to say call Walter greet, we can. We have access to that property via the prototypal chain. So really, this is the optimal usage of the JavaScript prototypal chain. We have seen the second usage of the this keyword. We have seen the usage of the new keyword. And what we'll see in the next video is that this is the way that classes work in JavaScript. Classes really are just syntactic sugar over this pattern, which by the way is good to know, because although you might see this pattern used, especially in some legacy code bases, it's really not recommended to write your code this way. So stay tuned for the next video. We'll see how to write classes, and that should be the way that you are writing your JavaScript. All right, thanks a lot for watching. I will see you all next time. If you enjoyed this, if you found value in it, give me a subscribe. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions, and I will see you all soon.